Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to Maps of Becoming the Eudaimonia podcast. My name is Edwina Murphy-Droomer, and today's episode I have been circling for a long time, for months in many ways, and I've got streams and streams of large artwork books with blank pages that I've filled up with thoughts and recognizing patterns and things that I want to share and how I want to share it. And I stayed on this process for such a long time that the content became deeper and deeper and deeper. And the deeper I went, the more difficult it felt to share what I so wanted to share. And, it occurred to me that I had the same experience after studying naturopathy and then functional nutrition. And the absolute love and passion that I felt for all the details and the why and the nuances of why we want to eat food that Mother Nature provides and why we want to use medicines, herbal medicines and, tinctures and things that Mother Nature provides, and why we want to spend time in the sun and, all the things that are so fundamental for our physical and mental health. It just felt like the most important possible thing that I could talk about. And yet, when I went to share all the details, it felt very strongly like there was a sense of trying to convince people to do something. And none of us ever respond well to people trying to convince us to do something. It's like having children that don't want to eat vegetables, or teenagers that don't want to go to bed before 11 o'clock at night, or we have a sense of the minute we're trying to be convinced of something, there's a wall that goes up, and it's there's the inner rebel comes out. And I feel that there is a sense of this with fairy tales as well, and there's a sense of how on earth can this be the life-changing tool that I know it to be. And, it's interesting because I think as I say that, there's an element in me that is continually wanting to be convinced as well. And that is the analyzer brain, the left side of my brain that all of us have been so heavily educated by, is that left-brained thinking. It's in like X plus Y equals and 1, 2, 3, 4. Everything's got to be linear and logical and structured, and that very left brain masculine way of thinking. And fairy tales are the exact opposite. It is reading something that feels whimsical and often ridiculous and like fantasy, because that's how we have been taught to think about it. The traditional fairy tales that were written as soul nourishment, as ways to pass on wisdom, were denatured, just as we denatured food and took all the nutrition out and made it, this almost like morphine-like substance, this dopamine-inducing, exciting substance that is sugar. We took, the nutrition out of food and replaced it with artificial colors and flavors and sugars. And then, like our dopamine centers light up like a Christmas tree. And so that's what we want to eat. And we've done the same thing with traditional fairy tales that were written to nourish the psyche, to, they are literal maps of becoming, understanding the art of living, how we become who we want to be. And the nourishment was taken out of them, and they were for want of a better term, Disneyfied. So they became the dopamine inducing fantasies with no substance, the icing without the nourishment of a really good cake underneath it. So this is the circling of how and why this is the direction that my work has taken. So as somebody who's been in the personal development world for many, many years now, and for most of my career, there was a foundation of vision building through vision boards. And the core element of that is so enticing and so delicious and so fun, is digging out who you want to be, what you want to do, and what you want to have. And for the vast majority of women, there really is very few times, if any, in our lives when this question is asked in a very direct way and we are given time and support to find the answers. And it is still something that I know is incredibly powerful work and important work. But there's something underneath that is actually even more important, because there are 5 universal truths, and these truths have been woven into ancient texts and mythology and scripture for thousands of years, across every culture, in every different language, across cultures that have never had any contact with each other, but still these 5 universal truths exist. And I'm not going to go into them, the 5 of them today, but just one. And that is that our minds are not a camera, they're a projector. Obviously said in all sorts of different ways. But the way that we see life is a projection of the reality that we have created through our thoughts, through our beliefs, through our environment and conditioning from the day we're born. Like little sponges, we take in reality through the voice of people that we're exposed to, through the stories that we hear, throughout the information and the books that our teachers put in front of us, and so on and so on. And that then forms our reality. It forms the way that we speak, and the way that we think, and the way that we speak then dictates the things that we do. And in order to change a reality, to change a life, requires changing the way we think. And to change the way we think is not something that can happen in a 5-point checklist. It's not a PDF that you print out. It's not affirmations that you repeat for a week and then forget. It is in learning a new language. And the way that I describe this, through the way that I learned this, is it is the language of right brain. It is the language of dreams. It is the language of fairy tales. It is the language of the I Ching, and in more modern times, the adaptation of that is Richard Rudd's Gene Keys work. It is learning a different way of thinking using different language. And then that becomes a different way of speaking, which leads to a different way of behaving. And so to interrupt the way that we have been taught to think, we need to do something radically different. And for me, it started with going back to fairy tales, going back to stories that in essence speak to the inner child, the child that is learning to speak for the first time, the child that is learning language through stories, learning how to speak through repetition, and learning how to act from what you learn in how you think and how you speak. Our entire lives are built on those three things. The foundation is how we think. If we want our lives to change, the projection, the reality, we must change the way we think. And then we change the way we speak, which changes how we behave. And our reality is a byproduct of how we think. So this is the work of fairy tales. So the last podcast that I shared, which was yesterday as I'm recording this, it was the last day of April and I'm recording this on the 1st of May. If I can get this out today, I will. But I shared the story yesterday of the Frog Prince and Faithful Henry. And I circled many stories that I thought might be more appealing, but because you might know them. You know, I want to dive into Snow White, the originals of Snow White and the Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast and the Ugly Duckling and all of these fabulous fairy tales. But I decided to go with the Frog Prince and Faithful Henry because it is the very first story in the original Grimm's fairy tales editions. I believe all of them. Any Grimm's fairy tales that you pick up, the Frog Prince and Faithful Henry is the first story, which of course then beggars the question, why? Because it is an initiation story. So I'm not going to tell you the story in this podcast, and it, you know, like you can pause it here and go and listen to the story and come back, or you can just keep listening and then take what I share and listen to the story through that filter. But before I dive in, I really want to stress the point that yes, these stories sound a little childish for good reason, but they're not just for children. They were stories told by women for other women to tell their children long before there was even a way to write them down. These are stories that have existed, some for hundreds and some for thousands of years, passed down through generations as maps of becoming for humanity. Hidden within them are vast clues, cautionary tales, ways of being that lead to outcomes that cause pain and outcomes that create a deeper sense of love, serenity, joy, all the good things. So let's dive in. The story of the Frog Prince and Faithful Henry is the story of a maiden. And when we talk about a maiden in fairy tales through Jungian analysis or through tarot or any of these, you know, in tarot, it's the fool, it's the beginning, I begin. And in Jungian terms, it's the innocent. It's the one that has that fabulous naivety, I never know how to say that word, about life. And so there is a lack of fear and there is an open heart and a willingness just to step forward, to embark on an adventure. So the story begins with the princess, with the maiden, with the fool. And she is in this fabulous childlike innocent state. and she's playing with a golden ball, and the ball is dropped and rolls down into a body of water that is so vastly deep she can't see the bottom. The gold is the soul. The gold is the part of her that is pure, that is just shiny and new and of untold value. She's playing with this in her becoming, and she drops it down, down, down into the subconscious. It goes. What do I do with this? And then we meet the frog, and the frog is what it is, not what it looks like. So we know that there is a prince within the frog because we've heard these stories 1,000 times. But the innocent doesn't know this. She has a projector, which is her mind, which sees nothing but a frog. So the frog to her is ugly and a little repulsive. And the frog says, I'm going to help you retrieve what is lost, but you must promise a level of intimacy with me. Now, we're not talking about sexual intimacy. This is all archetypes and all symbols in fairy tales are representations of different aspects of us, of the inner world. So every archetype lives within us and outside of us. So there are aspects of our personality, aspects of us that we can feel repulsed by. There are aspects of us that we don't want to admit exist, or we don't yet know, so that discomfort makes us want to ignore that it's there. I just want to keep skipping along exactly as I am. I want nothing to change. And so being presented with an aspect of ourselves that we find potentially repulsive or a bit ugly, we don't know what to do with it. The thought in our mind, the projection of what we see is, I don't want any part of this. I want to run away. But she still wants the golden ball that's at the bottom of this deep pool of water. And so the frog says to her, you need to promise intimacy. You need to promise that you will share food with me, that I can be your companion, that I can sleep in your bed. In other words, that you will accept me. And in her mind, she thinks, no way. But to get what she wants, she says, okay. And here we see the first rupture. The rupture is the breaking of alignment between our thoughts, words, and deeds. So she's thinking one thing, but says another and acts accordingly. So this is the first clue, a first cautionary message about the ramifications, the consequence of being out of alignment with the truth of what's in our head, what comes out of our mouth, and the actions we take. So the frog retrieves the golden ball and hands it back to her, and she turns her back and runs. So we then have a scene where she's at the table eating with the king. So the king is the archetype of the masculine, the mature masculine, the emperor in tarot, the mature, the father figure. So the father figure has wisdom to impart, and the wisdom to impart is you must honor what you say. Your word, you know, we've all heard the saying, you are only as good as your word, you know. So his message to her is that you must honor your word. She doesn't want to. So there's an aspect of her that is following the logic of knowing, the logic of this is the way to behave. But the rebel in her is like, this frog makes me feel uncomfortable. This frog is ugly. This frog is not who I want as a companion in my life. So this is the war between the innocent feminine and the masculine. She wants to stay in her being, doing what she wants without the doing. So in energetics, we talk about the feminine is the right brain, the feminine is the being, and the masculine is the left brain, the masculine is the doing. And we need both to work in harmony in order to reach happily ever after, in order for unity to happen within the soul, in order for our thoughts, words, and deeds to align. We need these two to come together. But there is struggle with this. As in all things in life, the struggle is necessary in order to build the strength, in order to build the maturity, in order to build all aspects of the psyche that come with the natural evolution of living from childhood to adolescence to adulthood. So this is the dilemma that she faces, the dilemma of avoidance, the dilemma of wanting to put your head in the sand, the dilemma of wanting to be a rebel and saying, I don't want to do this. I just want to keep being who I've always been. So the voice of the emperor is there. The voice of wisdom is known to her. And then we move to another part of the story. And here is the ultimate idea of intimacy, is taking the frog into her bed. And there is an understanding that this is not about an external sexual encounter. This is an internal acceptance of intimacy of all parts of ourselves. We then have a scene that is the one scene in the story that creates a shock. It is the moment of, it's the lightning strike in the story that makes our logical brain want to fire up, but we've got to look at it with our right brain. So in the Disney-fied version of this story, she kisses the frog and he becomes a prince. But in the traditional version of the story, she picks up the frog who is demanding something of her that she feels agitated about. But there is an initiative that she takes to move through the agitation, and that is to hurl the frog against the wall. And in doing that, the frog becomes a prince. There is a gene key that is the 51st gene key. And this story is an extraordinary story that gives an amazing picture of this gene key. And it is the gene key that moves from the shadow, so the seed of agitation, to the gift of initiative, to the siddhi, the highest frequency of awakening. So the agitation of doing something that feels desperately uncomfortable to her, she took initiative and she did something that was in alignment, in true alignment with her thoughts, and her words became a deed that created an awakening. The 51st gene key has a programming partner that is the 57th gene key. And this moves from Oh, I've just forgotten the first word. Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. Okay, kick back in, brain. I should have it in front of me. Intuition to unease. There it is, it's back. Thank you, menopausal brain. From unease to intuition to clarity. So you can see how unease and agitation in this story, using intuition and initiative, then bring clarity and awakening. And so it is this aspect of this story that will potentially offer you the most discomfort in your contemplation. But if you spend time with it, if you allow the seeds of this story to roll around and you nourish them with your attention, it has been my experience that the most extraordinary insights into your own life, your own choices, and your own way of being will come through. There is another element to this story that is Faithful Henry. And we meet Faithful Henry right at the end of the story. And right at the end of the story, there is the telling of freeing the heart, of letting love back in. And as we journey through life, there are so many experiences that can persuade, convince, determine the openness of our heart and our willingness to let love in. The number of times we've experienced shame, rejection, denial of who we are and our gifts and our version of reality, these different experiences that we have in our lives, separation, that cause us to close off our heart. There are clues in this story, in this map of becoming, that help us see how we can start removing those bands, those iron bands that create a cage around our heart, not letting other people in, that allow us to start breaking those bands. And that is the real gift of this story of initiation. So the initiation, if we look at it through tarot, and I'm going to use tarot because I've spoken about tarot quite a lot in the Eudaimonia library and in the first podcasts. But if we think about it in terms of there are the four aspects of masculine and feminine energetics, through the masculine of the internal of the magician or the elemental witch, depending on which name you choose to use. The internal, which is I will. The internal of the high priestess, which is I know. The internal of that's the feminine energetics. And then there's the external expression of that, which is the empress, which is I nourish, and the emperor, which is I decide. So using those four elements, the two for the masculine energetics and the two for the feminine energetics, if you can use those in your contemplations of this story, I imagine that there will be profound insights that come through for you. Inside the Eudaimonia library, there is this free content which I put out, and then there is $88 a month for if you subscribe, or $888 for the year. And if you want to deepen these conversations, that's where that happens. That's where I'm going to dive deeper into these stories. That's where I'm going to look at it through the lens of different gene keys. And if you know your gene keys, I hope you will bring those in there with you so that we can look at those together. And through tarot, and of course through the Jungian insights of what these different archetypes and symbols have to teach you about your becoming, your life, where you've been, and where you're going. All right, beautiful souls, that is it from me today. If you want to listen to the reading of The Frog Prince and Faithful Henry, that episode is in the Eudaimonia library, and it is also on Spotify and on Apple, wherever you prefer to listen. And I'm also uploading the videos for these podcast episodes on YouTube. All right, beautiful souls, that is it from me today. So much love, and bye for now.